It would be very important to listen to PGAV's presentation in light of the fact that we haven't had a lot of time to look over that presentation or hear tonight's presentation, and also have the input from the public. After February 3rd, if we could have a commission meeting that would have PGAV and River Street back for questions from us. So at the end of that meeting, walk away again for a period of time to digest everything we've heard, have the final meeting to vote at that time.
Let me understand, are you making a motion, Mr. Tripper?
Just discussion at this point.
Okay.
I'd be happy to move it.
If I understand what you're asking this commission to consider, is the next meeting the 3rd of February, followed by another meeting which we have both the developer, Urban Street, and PGA, the planner, presented to us, and open for our comments and questions to them publicly?
Correct.
And it would be restricted to the commission or open? Okay, fine. What's the rest of the commission's feelings about this, please?
I think it's very important that we do that. I don't feel as if we've had ample time to go through all the numbers that were in this presentation, and I'd like to hear what PGAV has to say, and so that we can come back with that and then digest what the community has to say, so we can have some intelligent conversation, questions, answers before we make our final decision. I'd like to have time to do my due diligence.
Does anyone else care to comment on this issue or subject?
I'd just like to know whether or not this would be a continuation of the public hearing, and I'm not sure that the commission can meet outside of it.
Well, I think the commission needs to, the redevelopment plan and the cost-benefit analysis need to be in final form prior to the conclusion of the public hearing. And so I would suggest that certainly the commission can hear PGAV's remarks regarding the plan and the cost-benefit analysis tonight. And then at the conclusion of tonight's meeting, if the commission wants to have another meeting before February 3rd, the commission can do so. And then the commission should be prepared to ask questions of PGAV on the night of February 3rd. And then if the commission still has questions that night, then the commission can decide whether or not to close the public hearing or whether to leave the public hearing open until the following week, for instance. But then once the public hearing is closed, then the discussion would be on the recommendations with respect to the development plan and the project.
Does that answer your question?
I guess what I'm asking, if the commission wants to meet subsequent to the public hearing, would that need to be an open meeting?
Sure.
That's what I thought. Okay, so, all right. And I was just misunderstanding what some of the commissioners were talking about.
My only comment was if the commission has questions regarding the redevelopment plan and the cost-benefit analysis, we should keep the public hearing open until the following week. And then we would, and those questions would be asked as part of the public hearing, and then we'd close the public hearing, and then they'd be ready for a vote.
Because we have a certain amount of time after the close of the public hearing in order to render our decisions. Is that correct?
That's right.
How many days?
30 days.
I'm sorry, I missed that here.
30 days after the close of the public hearing. But I'd recommend that, after, at the end of tonight's meeting, the commission can decide if the commission wants to have another meeting before February 3rd, and then on February 3rd, the commission can determine whether all of its questions have been answered with respect to the plan and the cost-benefit analysis, or whether there's a need for additional time to review those numbers.
Can we schedule something before February 3rd then to go through these numbers?
Oh, sure.
I mean, I just don't feel as if I've had ample time to review and analyze. I mean, there's a lot of numbers.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that I've done my due diligence here, and I don't feel as if I've had the time to do so.
Yeah, and that was on the agenda. You'll see the next to last item was set date for next meeting. And so when in drafting the agenda, we thought that the commission may well want to have another meeting prior to February 3rd for that exact purpose. So certainly that's within the commission's prerogative.
If I may, I would suggest that we follow the agenda, and the fifth and last item before the adjournment is exactly what you're discussing. And this commission, after tonight's presentation, is going to determine what they have still need to get from the information presented to them, what they feel they haven't completely understood. I'm not ready to, I would not recommend, let's put it that way, a plan for a meeting now. I would wait till the beginning of this meeting, see where we're lacking, and make a decision at that time. Now, I have no problem with that, but can we wait till the end of the meeting, then say, hey, let's set a meeting for another date before the 3rd of February, and then if that still isn't enough, we always can go afterwards. We have 30 days, as opposed to pre-plan now and find out we don't really need it, or put ourselves behind a meeting we don't have to have.
I just want to make sure that tonight
Yes.
wasn't the only opportunity.
Oh, no, it's not. It's not. Not at all. In fact, I'm sure these proposals and documentations will be on the city's website. If they're not yet, they will be shortly. So anyone in the citizenry, as well as the commissioners, can take all the time they want to review those. You can make the pictures real big so it's easier to read. And so it's available to us. It will be shortly. I think those are good issues. Well brought up. Do you have a question? Or any other discussion on this at this point? Well, that being the case, I would like to have the representative from PGAV step before us and take care of the meeting for us, run for a bit, and see what's going on. Hi, John.
Thank you. I'm John Brancaglione, Vice President at PGAV. And what I'd like to do is walk you through both the redevelopment plan and the cost-benefit analysis. I'll try to answer whatever questions you have and get the answers if I can't answer them. I don't have the benefit of Andy Struckoff with me tonight, who is the person who does all our bond revenue work and did a lot of work on these projections, but I think he filled me in fairly well. Let's start with the redevelopment plan. And the first thing I want to do here is discuss how this is organized. There are various sections to this, 5 altogether, and then some attachments. And rather than go through all of this in great detail, you have the document and certainly can read it further after tonight. It's pretty, I think, self-explanatory. Section 1 is the introduction. Section 2 is the basis for the designation. And then Section 3 gets into the discussion of the way in which this qualifies as a blighted area under state statute. And for the benefit of anyone who hasn't been in this, I refer you to look at the photographs in the appendix to this document. The conditions in Crestwood Plaza, I've seen some fairly awful buildings and properties in my career. This is one of the worst. And its conditions were largely, I think, the result of lack of maintenance that goes back quite some time, and the fact that there was virtually no maintenance during Centrum's ownership, and then the period of time that it in essence sat vacant. So there is significant water damage in the Sears building, for example. It infiltrated the roof and went down all 3 floors. And that has continued unabated. There's leaking that has occurred consistently around the skylighting. There was a major water main break where one of the main water lines came in at the lower end of the Macy's building. That flooded a significant part of the mall area and the Macy's ground floor at that time. When Centrum held some sort of I don't know exactly what it was, but they allowed the folks that were in there at the time, and apparently anyone else who wanted to come in there, take out fixtures. They literally ripped things off the walls. They broke glass, mirrors. It is a debris minefield. And then the water that has gotten in has mold growing virtually everywhere in various and sundry types. The electrical system is pretty much shot. The gas mains have all been shut down. The water is shut down. In fact, the water system, when we were there the first time, was only servicing a restroom. I don't know how they made it work, but in essence, it was the only water serving it. And you'll see in the document a letter from the fire chief. A primary concern is if there were a fire, particularly in the buildings that are down at the eastern end, the strip, the connector that goes to Dillard's. Since the water has to come to fight a fire, has to come from Sappington or Watson, and because the parking structure is such that driving heavy vehicles on top of it isn't potentially safe, it would be very difficult to fight a fire in that structure, yes.
When you say the structure, are you talking about on the east end of Dillard's, the parking garage is not safe to drive fire equipment on? Is that what I heard you say?
That was, apparently there was a time at which Bi-State ran a bus loop through there and quit running the bus loop over it when it was still open, in part because the garage has a lot of spalling. There's a lot of falling concrete that's happened, it may not be structurally unsound. I'm not an engineer. I just know that it is not a good idea, apparently, to drive heavy vehicles over the top of it. And you can see that that photo in the lower left there, for example, that parking structure is moving, and so it's part of it is sinking, and then it's also moving apart, which is another indicator that it has some issues. The photographs that are in here, I won't bore everybody with all of these, but they just go on and on. Now, our last visit into the property, our most recent, I should say, that occurred about a month ago, there's all sorts of indications that they're breaking into that building and getting in there and doing further damage, and who knows exactly what else is going on. So the buildings is clearly, in our opinion, a safety hazard. So if you look at how this property qualifies by looking through section 3, and by the way, there are 3 parcels associated with this, which is something we've been fairly insistent on from the beginning. It includes also the Firestone building and the Music City building. Those buildings are backed by the parking garage. When the garage is demolished, there may or may not have to be improvements to the back of those properties once that is torn down, because they'll be there in a fair amount of isolation, if you will. So this certainly qualifies under any number of the criteria in the TIF Act as a blighted area. if I compare this, we've now seen physically and been in all three of the major malls in St. Louis that have been closed. Jamestown, Northwest, and now Crestwood. I have personally been in them. I've been on the roof of those buildings. I've been in every nook and cranny along with members of our staff. I can only assure you that this is the worst of the three. So we have defective or inadequate street layout. That is by virtue of the internal roadway network and the pedestrian connections to the plaza. They're virtually non-existent. It was built that way. Part of the road network that you have internally now works only for what is there today, and because part of that road network is supported by the garage, obviously there are issues associated with its long-term usability, even if you were going to reuse this property. And certainly the medians in Watson Road have been a known issue for a long time, and the city has worked with MoDOT to attempt to get those removed. They become a barrier to how you can reuse and re-access the property, and they've been a constant source of issue to all of the property owners up and down Watson Road, basically from south to west. Unsanitary and unsafe conditions I've already covered. They are truly significant. The electrical system in there has a unique aspect to it that was revealed when UE tried to turn off the electricity, or UE, you can tell how old I am there, when Ameren tried to turn off the electricity to the facility in the first place. Apparently they there's a transformer that had an interlink to the residential subdivision next door, and it put them out of power. That has now been corrected and it is shut off, but again, it's evidence of how things were sort of patched together as Crestwood Plaza was built. Deterioration of site improvements should be very obvious, and improper or subdivision or obsolete platting is a condition here as well. Part of the challenge to redeveloping this, particularly if you were talking about developing it totally as a commercial use from one end to the other, is that it was built to a single purpose, if you will. And because the site is long and narrow, and because you have 100 feet of drop from one end to the other, when you start tearing things down and try to live with this as it originally existed, it's very tough because the property is so long and narrow and is an irregular shape. We know that at one point Centrum had talked to some large commercial users who concluded that they couldn't use the property or didn't want the site because it meant that they were going to have to completely reconfigure their building to make it work on that property. And the widest piece of it, of course, is the Dillard's Inn. But that's where you have a huge hole in the ground once you tear that parking garage down. And so attempting to fill that end of the site is again one of the financial challenges of this project. And so the conclusions that are reached in that section of the plan in our mind, this is a blighted property and fits every description of probably every redevelopment statute on the books in Missouri. It's quite appalling, and if, like me, you were someone who shopped in there on a regular basis, it's very sad. It's just really sad. The rest of the plan, for example, the data with respect to the economics of this, you can see that this property has continued to drop in value and went down in value again just recently based on the last assessment, well, which is not yet finalized, but we've used the number that's been put forth by the assessor as a likely number at this point. This area, unlike what you sometimes find when you look at criteria under the tax increment statute, it's not only an economic liability, but it's a social liability because there are so many issues that are unhealthy, unsafe, associated with this property that by virtue of that definition in the statute, it qualifies as a social liability as well as an economic liability. And then when you move to section 4, you get a description of the project, its various components, and the approximate size of the development that is proposed as a part of the project that you heard from the developer in your previous meeting. The estimated redevelopment project costs are an adaptation of the costs that are in the developer's pro forma that we reviewed along with city staff as it was presented, and table 4.1 on page 30 gives you the estimated redevelopment project cost in total. The second table gives you the costs and financing sources, and then as you go forward in that section, table 4.3 shows you the estimated EAV after redevelopment and the most recent amount, and therefore the total incremental value from a property tax standpoint. And then section 5 is basically the findings. Those are straight from the TIF Act in terms of the findings that have to be made as a result of adoption. And then the supporting exhibits. The maps are the first item in Appendix 1. And then the letter from the fire chief and the boundary description is attachment 2. The developer's financing letter, and then a copy of, the photo appendix in attachment 4, and then lastly is the city's relocation policy adopted by ordinance in compliance with state statute is the one in the same ordinance from 1998. So I've kind of gone through that in an overview fashion. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to the next item?
Just real quick, in our initial meeting, there seemed to be, the exhibits seemed to have a lot more information on the site plan itself, building location, circulation, things of that nature. And in previous TIF commissions, the blight analysis was a totally separate document. And then it seems to be incorporated with the redevelopment plan, and the redevelopment plan doesn't have much that site-specific information.
The redevelopment plan, or the project redevelopment plan, which is what you're referring to, is a separate item from the TIF redevelopment plan. And the reason being is that because at the end of the day, there are all sorts of project examples I could cite. For example, at Sunset Plaza, Home Depot wasn't in the original site plan. The original site plan was, when the TIF was approved, was another user. So this plan is purposely written to provide some flexibility. There's a redevelopment agreement that is a separate ordinance and a separate document that deals with some of the details in terms of payments, uses, so on and so forth. This tries to be the sort of the umbrella, if you will.
I was just thinking more along the lines of like the use of the green space, there was going to be trails, that kind of thing, so
Yeah,
making sure none of that goes away.
No, because at the end of the day, the developer's proposal has to contain certain things. That's tied to the redevelopment agreement.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I was just going to say I want to wait until after the cost-benefit analysis for my questions.
Okay.
But I'm probably going to go back to that topic.
Well, I have a quick question. So on table 4.3, the most recent EAV amount, am I to understand that that's going to change and go potentially down if the appeal goes through?
This already reflects the preliminary number.
Okay.
We're assuming for purposes of this, and we note that in the cost-benefit analysis tables, that it isn't going to change. So this number reflects that number.
Okay.
That number says 3 million, cost benefits like 1.2 million.
Relative to the plaza itself. This number is the plaza and the other two parcels,
Gotcha.
which is
Right.
why they're different.
Okay.
But it uses the 1.102 or whatever that number was. That's the number that's part of the 3 million total.
That's what he said. Does anyone else have questions, comments?
I have one other question.
Okay.
Yeah, and also in the first meeting, Mr. Powers had mentioned the proximity of Grants Trail. Has the city required or asked about any possible enhancements, connections you could make to Grants Trail from here?
The discussions have gone on, maybe Mark has been,
And then it's going to be part of the redevelopment agreement. And so that's being discussed between the city and the developer, but yes, the city is committed to making a connection to the trail.
Great.
yeah, I can't answer questions about the redevelopment agreement. I'm not involved in those discussions, but I knew it was under discussion.
Do we have any further questions or comments? You proceed, sir.
Thank you. The cost-benefit analysis that you were handed tonight I think that's correct. Adam, you gave them the...
It's up to date.
Yeah. It has one typo change that was where a heading was numbered incorrectly. The numbers are the same as the numbers you saw before, so there's no difference. We tried to make some of those tables bigger so they'd be easier to read. And we did some shading that you'll see in some of those tables that I'll come back to in a minute. Otherwise, I'm just making the point that the numbers aren't different, we just tried to make it easier to use. And we corrected one typo that we found we didn't find it from, I think an Alderman found it in one of the headings. Okay. The basis for these numbers comes from our investigations and assumptions, and certainly their educated guesses, because we don't know exactly who's going to be there yet. We do know the types and, in some cases, the particular potential tenant that the developer's talking to. So the important thing to remember is that these numbers reflect build out as it's intended with the uses that are intended. So, for example, in the case of let me go to property values first. We use the assessor's appraised values for properties of comparable type and size in southwest St. Louis County, wherever we could. For movie theater value comps, we looked at Ronnie's, West Olive, Creveport, De Pere, the current state-of-the-art cinema. And used an average number. So we didn't use, we threw out the high end and we threw out the low end, and in every case attempted to use a midpoint number. There really aren't any good Class A comparables for multifamily in this part of the county. If you look at the rated, the best apartment complexes that have consistent maintenance, that have consistent high rentals, you can go to Georgetown on one end, or you can go to, and that's in Shrewsbury for anyone who isn't familiar, or you can go to Clayton on the Plaza. So Georgetown is at 48,000 a unit. Clayton on the Plaza is at 100,000 plus, depending on the unit type. Again, we're attempting to be in the middle here with a value that's between those. Table 2, the retail estimates. For example, when we assume a grocery store of the size we're talking about, there are lots of examples in the St. Louis area, and so again we're using an average of those, which in many cases, because we do bond revenue studies, we have actual sales numbers for actual stores. Now, we're not allowed to tell you, for example, what the Deerbergs and Arnold is doing, because we did the bond revenue study for that project. That's against the law. But I'm simply pointing out that we're using, in every instance, actual numbers from a project for that kind of use, something that's presently in existence. And then, of course, the same thing goes with fitness memberships or sales, are subject to sales tax. Theater sales are based on the national average sales per screen, figures including the tickets plus concessions. And again, tempered if we felt necessary because we had an actual number. In fact, we have several actual numbers for theaters here in the St. Louis area. So, personal property taxes paid by existing businesses have been included in the cost-benefit analysis. That's sort of the basis for how we come up with these numbers. We go out of our way to be conservative because what we want to have happen always, two examples that come to mind that are now benefiting the Lindbergh School District and the other taxing districts. Gravois Bluffs, for example, had a TIF projection by our cost-benefit analysis of about 16 years, and it actually completed its debt in about 12 years. Sunset Plaza was at 15, and it sunsetted in just a little over 11. So my point is, we want to have that outcome instead of the other outcome, so we try to make these numbers conservative. The front end sort of gives you the approach as to how we went about it. And then beginning with the tables, these first group of tables are some of the inputs that are used to generate the numbers.
Could you give us a table that you're looking at?
Table 1, for example. Oh, yes.
Thank you.
So Table 1 shows the project component, the improvement in terms of its size, the unit that's being used for the calculation, the estimated appraised value, the market value per whatever unit is involved, the assessment rate, and then the projected assessed value. So that becomes the basis, the starting point. The next table is retail sales. And so in that particular table, you have the breakdown, again, of various uses and the average sales per square foot that are input to the numbers. So, for example, grocery stores of this ilk these days run between 400 and 485, 490 a square foot. So we're using 450. And so on and so forth down the line. You can see how these were derived. Table 3 is the estimated base sales. Table 4 is the real property taxes by district. And you'll notice at the bottom it shows those taxes that are not applicable to TIF. In other words, they're not captured for TIF purposes. And then table 5 is the equalized assessed value and taxpayer data for the current properties.
In their current state.
Yes,
So if I could ask,
that's equalized assessed value now, not market value.
okay, so when you say equalized, explain what that is as opposed to market value, so I can really clear.
Market value is what the assessor thinks it would sell for. In other words, it's value as on an arm's length transaction. Equalized assessed value is the number that is the basis for the taxes. So it'll be 32% or 19%, or in this case, they'll all be 32% because they're all commercial property.
Thank you. If there's other questions, just please, your button so I can recognize you.
And then the statute requires that the,
Hey, John, may I jump in on one point? On table 5, I want to just clarify Ms. Gordon's comment from earlier. Her statement was correct. Her statement was correct as to the difference in the assessed valuation. The statute requires the plan state the most recent assessed valuation. So the confusion between 2014 and the 2014 stipulation amount and 2015. 2015, the most recent, the current assessed valuation is the higher number. Which is under appeal, as you stated. The stipulation amount is 14. And so the plan is correct in that it shows, and it correctly states, the current assessed valuation of the property. But recognizing that there already is a stipulation for 2014, it's likely, highly likely, that the assessed valuation for 15 also will decrease, which is why the cost-benefit analysis was prepared on the basis of the 2014 stipulation amount. So I just want to point out, where you were going with that was exactly correct.
so now if we move to the next round of tables, Table 6 is an attempt to sum up all of the taxes that are generated for TIF purposes. So this is payments in lieu of taxes, are what the rest of the world knows as property taxes. And the economic activity taxes, which are sales taxes. And then you can see how it's broken down. The total projected incremental real property, the sales taxes, and then the total TIF revenues. And then the contribution from the bottom half of the special district. That's the CID and TDD revenues. In other words, these are the amounts that then go into the TIF dollars. And that was, I think, to answer someone's question who asked.
I had another question. These numbers assume, I have kind of two questions. Unlike Crestwood, after they enclosed the mall, I think nobody did any upkeep. These numbers assume that whoever the tenants or owner of the property is upkeeping the property, A. And B, does it take into account when you open a restaurant or open
5% per year, depending on which retailer or type of use it is, then it levels. And for our purposes, to be conservative, we'll use a flat number, which in this case is probably 3%. Do you remember?
And so that's to take into account that the big bump at the beginning and then either the leveling out or the decline?
Right.
Okay.
And we don't make any, I mean, sometimes, again, what happens is once a property gets to be, I don't know, let's say 10 years old, there'll be some spruce up, paint up, whatever. You might even have a tenant who does a redo at that point. And so you might get a bump again, albeit a minor one. We're not doing that here. This is flatlined.
And
1%
Barb,
a year.
what is it?
1% per year
On sales taxes?
on sales tax.
Okay, so even lower than, I didn't think it was more than 2, that it's a rare occasion we would use that kind of a rate. And she knows because we probably debated it with the developer. And so this number then gives you sort of the summary of everything that goes into TIF. Now, I did some things that I thought you might be interested in. And so what I did was I took the number, the bottom line number here, the total annual revenue available for TIF. And if you take that and project it out at an annual interest rate of 5% compounded annually, this TIF retires its debt in about 10 years. The $15 million TIF. Remember, we're talking about 2 separate things here, even though the total's 25. We have TIF on the one hand, and it's the redevelopment plan limits the TIF to $15 million. So it has a debt retirement using these numbers of 10 years. Actually, it's 10 years and a little less, probably 10 years and 2 months, and 10 months, something like that. So then, if you keep going through these tables, Table 7 shows the summary of the projected TIF revenues and goes into the detail that supports how you got to the number on the other page or on the previous table. So this is all the detail from the various taxing districts. And those taxes that aren't committed to TIF. And that table is a 2-page table. Now, why are the last columns shaded? I did another exercise because, again, I thought you might be interested in knowing if we take all of the revenue, TIF and TDD, and remember the combination of those is the $25 million number. So if we take all of the revenue from all of the sources and it were issued in a single note. So you're not doing a TIF note, and you're not doing a CID note, you're rolling it all into one issuance. All of the debt retirement, all of that debt is retired in 15 years, and again, it's actually probably 14 and a half when you look at the amortization. Again, annual compounding, 5.5 interest. And these, I'm not assuming anything fancy when I did this. I mean, depending on how this might happen, if there was some reason to take this and issue it as bonds, like in the third year out or something like that. Greg, I know you went through it in Arnold. If you were to do that and you had debt coverage, you had debt coverage and you had super sinker in terms of using that coverage to retire at the end. These numbers would be different, but I'm trying to keep them in the most simplistic form and operating under the assumption that these are going to be notes held by the developer and/or the developer's financing entity.
John?
Yeah.
If I look at this page 7, and I go to the column headed 50% of incremental sales taxes, I look down at column 2018, I see $740,000 and $880. Anyway, that would be the taxing, that would be the revenue received by the school district and the city. Is that what that is? Because, or is that the amount of money?
No, these are TIF revenue.
That would be a TIF revenue, okay.
These are revenues, this table is showing you what's going into TIF.
Then what of that, what would be left for the city in that particular instance? You have a table showing that that's the case.
Yes.
Please.
It's way in the back. Yeah, I was going to say it's table 15.
Okay, thank you. I just want to know what reference on that.
Yeah. Table 15. And it shows you, this is the fiscal impact on affected taxing districts.
So if I read that correctly, I haven't read it right yet, but in 2018, the city of Crestwood would receive $374,000 if this projection is right in revenues,
That's correct.
versus what now is the city's school district would receive $145,000. Okay, thank you very much. I wasn't clear on what we were receiving while we were giving away some of the revenue path.
Then if we go to table 8, this tries to answer the question regarding the sales tax pool. And that's really entertaining because you have to understand the pool formula. But what it contemplates is that when Crestwood gets new sales taxes, your proportion of the share could potentially go down. However, that depends on whether the pool goes up. So we don't try to predict what will happen long term. We're simply showing you in these numbers what happens under the present percentage of sharing. Because I don't know how we do it. Not and have anything that would make any sense or be worth the effort.
Is the pool adjusted every year?
No. I didn't think it was.
I think some of it is and some of it isn't.
Of course.
It's very complex. Now, if Andy were here, we can reserve that question for he delved into it at some level of detail beyond what I'm telling you. I just know basically how it works. And I know that we assume that the percentage that the city contributes would stay at its current number because we have no way of knowing what's going to happen after the fact. And again, all the shading is doing in each of these tables that wasn't in the original version is showing you what happens if everything goes away in 15 years. In other words, that's everybody's money in the shaded area. It's not part of TIF, it's not part of anything anymore.
But for me to just be clear, you're saying that the TIF itself, $15 million TIF, would be paid off in 10 years.
If you do it as separate, now, it need not be deceptive here. If you do it as a separate TIF note, it's done in 10 years, based on these numbers. If you do the combined financing, all of the debt goes away in 15 years. If you did 10 million in TIF, in or TDD and CID notes, in other words, the other part of this equation, that's about a 24-year return. Because 50% of that revenue is captured for TIF purposes until year 10, and then in year 10, it takes a big bump upward, of course, because you're getting the other 50% for TIF or for TDD and CID financing. Does that make sense?
Is
Mark?
it typically done that way? As one?
I didn't really follow John's explanation, to be honest with you.
Oh, Lord.
Let me say, what typically is done is that you look at the entire revenue stream and look at the entire amount of public assistance. And so I think realistically, if one were to look at this, we wouldn't break it apart. And that's why the redevelopment plan talks about 25 million. And so I think the taxing districts and everyone should assume that, we're looking at the entire revenue stream, TIF, TDD, and CID, and we're looking at one $25 million obligation, and what's the time period for repayment of that. We've not run those numbers. I suspect the developer has done his projections, and so that might be a question to ask the developer of what their expectation is. But that's how I would look at it. I think it kind of confuses things if you start piecemealing it, because that's not the way it's going to work in reality.
So what?
The only reason I went through this exercise was because we had a couple of folks that somewhere along the line asked that question, so I thought, well, okay, I'll give you all three scenarios.
So if all of them are done, this is typically done, what's the year, what's the time?
That's 15.
15.
And that assumes, again, I'll use Sons of Hills as an example. I forget who the original, there were two parties that occupied the space that Home Depot ultimately took up. It was split up the middle, I think, more or less. So when Home Depot came into the equation, the numbers accelerated because their sales per square foot were larger. It's one unit than the combined other two. On the flip side of the equation, on the other side of the street, CompUSA went in. Nobody expected that, and those kinds of stores, since the ticket going out the door is usually pretty big, so that all those numbers changed and accelerated the debt return.
And does this also, you talked about three parcels the whole time? Prior
Yes.
to when all that's assumed in here that those three parcels or the other two have been acquired, that they're all part of this one project, or is that still?
No. No, we're assuming those, for purposes of this, those parcels are doing what those parcels are doing today. If ultimately they're acquired, the likelihood that that would be reused, that their property would be reused for anything other than sidewalk, landscaping, and lights is probably slim. On the other hand, their sales are small enough relatively that it's not going to have a great effect on these numbers one way or another.
Would it change the overall price of the project, though, to acquire those properties? The $104 million?
Not if this TIF plan is adopted. Well, it might change it, but it's not going to affect what is dedicated to the project from any of these sources. In other words, for example, Chuck, land acquisition is a permitted use under the TIF statute. It's a permitted use in the plan. So if they ultimately want to spend some of those dollars to acquire those properties, that's acceptable, but it's still limited by the numbers that are in the document. And those same numbers will be in the redevelopment agreement, so it'll be fixed, if you will. The cap will be fixed. And then, where are we? We're on table 8. Table 9 is the distribution of base economic activity taxes and sales tax revenues that aren't captured by TIF. So these are dollars that aren't going into the TIF pot. Table 10 is the distribution of real property taxes from the base equalized assessed value. In other words, remembering that TIF freezes the current valuation, this is simply showing you where those dollars go during the life of the project. Table 11 is an attempt to give you a feel for what personal property taxes will accrue. Again, you have to use existing types of development to establish those numbers. Table 12 is the distribution of projected average annual personal property taxes. In other words, who gets those taxes and what the rate is. And then the table 13 is the distribution of the projected commercial surcharge. Again, that's not going into any of the financing, so whatever that is accrues to everybody as the development occurs. Table 14 is the one that challenges your eyesight. And the problem with this is if we don't keep it together, it becomes even more difficult to deal with. Like I said, we tried to make this table as big as we could get it. When we did this revision. But this is showing you the fiscal impact of the new project on affected taxing districts, both base and increment. And that table continues on to the second page. And again, using the 15-year scenario, we've shaded those last years. Table 15 is the summary of fiscal impact on affected taxing districts, base and increment. And then the last group of tables is, well, not the last group, table 16 is the so-called no-build alternative, which which assumes, for purposes of this, that nothing happens. Now, would something happen? I don't know. Here's the conundrum in terms of trying to make that assumption. Nothing, in our opinion, will happen unless this property is demolished. You can't effectively do anything with what's there now. And if you tried, the cost would exceed what it would cost to build whatever new. Let's say you were, unlike Northwest Plaza, where I believe it's the Macy's building that was salvageable and they recycled it, and it's Charter's, one of Charter's new call centers. There just isn't anything to save here. So when you have a cleared site, you have the ability to develop with something. So looking at it from our standpoint, if you cleared this site, and we think that it's in everybody's interest to get that as soon as possible. It's a liability both for the developer and I think for the city. Then what do you put there? We know that the market doesn't support all retail. We've looked at that every which way but upside down. And we, in Crestwood, in spite of attempts on my part in the past, at the request of past boards, has never been an enticing location for someone to do like an office campus, for example, which quite frankly, this property would lend itself to. Because you can do an office campus with changes in elevation and you can get greater square footage by parking structures and so on and so forth. If I were to stand here and tell you that somebody would do that, I'd be very surprised because it would contradict years of efforts to try to get interest in that capacity. Now, that there is an office user that's been actively looking at this is to me a great thing, but I don't believe that there's enough office market, at least not in our previous numbers, to show that you could do this all in office. So, if nothing is built here, this is going to stand vacant. If the buildings are torn down, in our mind, this is going to stand vacant for some period of time until whatever market planets need to align.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Why doesn't the market support all retail? Can you give me?
It just doesn't. If you look at the St. Louis retail market, we just got through doing a market assessment. We did one applicable to this area. We did one applicable to a wonderful site in St. Charles County, where you'd think that anything would fly out there. The retail market has been saturated since before the recession, which is one of the reasons so much retail vacancy occurred when that hit. Most major markets, and St. Louis appears to be no exception, were overbuilt. So while you have capacity, and in fact, the market assessment we did for Crestwood, for what we call the trade area, and which updated the Chicago firm's work from, I don't know, like 2005, shows the same thing, and that is that there is a market for certain kinds of retail, many of which, by the way, are what's targeted in this proposal, but not the ones that could fill up this, not enough to fill up this site. Not given what's already in the market and or vacant. I mean, trust me, I would have loved nothing better than to have that be an outcome, but it's just not, it's not there. And one other thing that has made a major dent in the regional market for certain types of goods and services, in our opinion, based on when you look at how the numbers change, are the outlet malls in Chesterfield. Particularly the one that's closer to the river, Premium.
Clarification and a couple of questions. Did I understand you to say that if the site was cleared and leveled, it would still be some time before any retailer would approach and be interested?
No. The target, the people that this developer has been talking with and approaching are the same ones that showed up in our market assessment from back at the first of this year, or first of 2015, I think, goes back. Adam, do you remember what the date on that was?
That would have been January or February, right before I got here.
And no, there are, the grocery store thing, amazingly, is right up at the top of that list. There are other users, fitness, certain kinds of smaller retail. I don't remember them all off the top of my head, but no, it's not that there isn't any. It is that some of the folks that are out in to our knowledge, shopping and circling the St. Louis region, some of the bigger players, one of them has looked at this site and said no. The other one then would probably say the same thing. We don't know that they've looked at this site, but they would say the same thing because it's a similar footprint. It's a, if you had somebody like, I don't know, I'm just going to shoot from the hip, like a Meijer or a Menards or any of the big users that have been either looking at St. Louis or have developed here. Those are stores that are approach 200,000 square feet. And they need the parking field. So when you try to fit one of those on this site, I actually did. I took footprints from several of the large players that have been looking at St. Louis and tried to make them fit on the site, and they just don't fit. Then you got the topography issue on top of it. How do you deal with that? And filling a site is really expensive.
Question, you've got kind of a build and no build alternatives. The developers talked before about this could be done in phases. So the real numbers in this are probably someplace in between the two alternatives?
We phased these numbers to some degree when we phased in the users. But yes, your answer is correct. It depends on how fast the buildup is.
Okay. So the 15-year is kind of best case scenario to pay off the debt, assuming.
The 15-year is assuming that this is built out over a 2-year period.
Okay. And is that reasonable?
Yeah, I mean, from day one, a 2-year build out. When I say 2-year, I'm talking about 2 years so that the last one may be opening, maybe starting construction at the end of the 2 years. You're probably looking at 3 years when you're thinking revenue. But again, it's not the developer may be back there shooting daggers at them.
You also, when you've been here before, talking to the Board of Aldermen, and with the previous owner, you talked about the site should put stores or other functions in there that would draw people from 15 and 20 miles away, that there needed to be some uniqueness to what goes in here. What you put in as estimates, is there anything unique, or is it a 9-screen theater, drugstore?
At this point, all of the uses that are projected, we're not using unique.
So we're assuming a local clientele.
Well, we're assuming a trade area clientele, and if you look at what constitutes the Crestwood trade area, it's kind of a jagged outline. Doesn't get you to, for example, doesn't get you to West County Center, doesn't get you to South County Center, kind of goes further east because Crestwood always has drawn a lot from St. Louis Hills, for example. So it's a fairly large trade area, but it isn't a dot in the middle with a circle around it.
Can I follow up?
Please.
Thank you. So, kind of to follow up on Chuck's question about the uniqueness. I know in the redevelopment plan and project, one of the objectives is to form the basis for the redevelopment plan. What I was wondering is how, you have a theater, a gym, grocery store, bowling alley, and how is that the highest and best use and benefit to the taxing area when we have a number of the same businesses very close to this development? My concern is that it will just not be, what we're going to be doing is just shifting business from our existing gym, our existing Schnucks, our existing Deerbergs, our existing Ronnie's, or, are we not just going to be shifting business from businesses that are already generating taxes to this new development and then subsequently putting these other guys out of business?
Well, I don't know that you'll put them out of business. The answer to your question is that depending on who it is and what it is, there may be some initial shift, usually is. I haven't looked at the numbers, but when Walmart opened their doors in Shrewsbury, I'm certain it had some initial impact on Deerbergs. If we look at experience on at least some retailers, it's kind of like, if we look at experience on some of these situations, there'll be a capture initially from some competitor, and then eventually it levels out, if the competitor is a strong competitor. For example, we interviewed, now about 5 years ago, I think it was, for a study for another municipal client outside St. Louis area, but we interviewed competitors to Bass Pro because Bass Pro was wanting to put a store in a particular location. And the common notion was that it was going to hurt all of the folks that the sporting goods stores like, who would be like Denny Dennis here, would be.
Dunn's Sporting Goods.
Yeah, would be the common thing. What we found when we interviewed those owners were, no, they don't hurt us, bring them on. Because we deliver a service, we're carrying a product that they don't typically carry. In other words, some things are simply not going to affect others, and some might. Will they put them out of business? Not unless they're weak.
I guess my concern is that in the Crestwood area and the area that we are drawing from, there's a finite amount of people and a finite amount of money that these people will be spending, be it at the gym or at the grocery store, at the theater. And so if they're not spending it at Ronnie's, but they're spending it here, it's still the same amount of money. They're not going to be increasing their amount of money. So if we don't have some unique draw to bring new people to this area, I guess I don't follow the projections. I feel as if maybe it projects it here, but it's just taking it from somewhere else. We're just shifting money. We're not bringing in new money. And instead of the money going directly to Crestwood or Lindbergh, now it's going to a TIF for 25 years or whatever before we get it back. That's my concern, and I don't know if that's been taken into account in this cost-benefit analysis. I don't see it.
Well, the only way we can take it into account is to be conservative in our estimates based on what we know at this point. And of course, the developer, I assume, because we've had this conversation, knows that for the benefit of his own project, he needs to go after folks who aren't elsewhere in the market. Except that at this stage, I can't give you numbers beyond what we've given you, and we've tried to be conservative with them so that we're not creating a false impression unintentionally.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, you're correct in your assumption. There'll be some moving around, but ultimately, most businesses wind up being unaffected. Now, I can't speak for a mom and pop. That's a different scenario. Those people sometimes are affected.
But it's not really new market money that's coming in. It's as Kara said, it's money that's being transferred around. So, I mean, today if I want to go have a Red Robin hamburger, I've got to go to Fenton or I've got to go to the Pear. I don't have the option of doing it in Crestwood. So it's a shift in revenues throughout the region. And that has to be because there's very few new markets that would be introduced in this development. I mean, there's nothing. I don't think there's any sort of goods or services that are that unique that you would put in Crestwood that would draw from a larger regional base.
I'm with you, but what I'm afraid of is you've got Schnucks right across the street, right?
Right, but you know,
And so you're going to be taking, what's going to happen is we're going to be taking money from Schnucks over to whatever this grocery store is, and it's actually revenue that Crestwood was getting, that now it's not, because now it's going to the TIF. And I think that's just something to keep in mind, I guess is my point.
Yeah, but anybody that's shopping at Trader Joe's or Whole Foods is taking money out of Crestwood and putting it into other areas.
But I think that goes to the uniqueness of what Chuck was saying. I think Trader Joe's would fall into a unique category for this area.
That's what you're expressing is what the updated market assessment showed, in that if you look at those categories and you sort of think about, the grocery store thing is a great example, and you start thinking about why that number is the way it is. Well, it's because if you want Whole Foods or Trader Joe's, if you want Trader Joe's, you're going to where either Pear or Brentwood, et cetera, et cetera. So what the numbers were showing is that where there is no growth, or where there is no gap, is the way the economists look at it. Where there is no gap, that it means that it's being satisfied within the trade area. Where there's a gap, it means that it's being spent outside the trade area. And where there's an excess, I mean, in other words, when we look at these numbers and the ones that show up in red, tells us that you don't want to go after those folks because those are the ones that are too many are already here.
Do you see the grocery store market is expanding rapidly in St. Louis. Fresh markets, the Lucky's, I mean, they're popping up all over the place. and Trader Joe's and Whole Foods and all that. I mean, do you see that market getting to a saturation point?
Well, what's happening, and if you read the Wall Street Journal this morning, there was an article relative to that whole discussion and the people that, well, and actually there's a separate article that appeared in Crane's, which is Crane Chicago's business journal. In the Chicago area, as a case in point, yeah, they're proliferating all over the place, but the mom and pops are the ones that are suffering. In large part because it's the ones who don't have the buying power of the bigger players. And that's a fact.
I am Mr. Paul.
John, I guess the best use for this particular property is a mixed use, which has been proposed. In your analysis, how does the residential portion or the success of the residential portion affect the success of the commercial and retail portion of the project?
Well, it does and it doesn't. For example, if there is a fitness center, then ultimately that's a benefit. That's viewed as a benefit to the residential development because the fact that you can walk a block to the gym is a positive thing. One of the suggestions we made to the developer early on, and as he develops this plan, is that there need to be small shop spaces that are close to the residential development, so that if you want a quick lunch, if you want whatever, and you don't want to go very far for it, there needs to be some small shop space that's available to those people. Does the theater have an advantage? Probably. Do some of the other things? Maybe not. Grocery store certainly does. All of the things that are sort of core to this proposal are advantageous to the apartment development because you can, for all intents and purposes, you'd practically be able to walk to it.
Earlier we were talking about the two outlots and they might possibly be acquired. I'm assuming if they're acquired that the amount of retail space that is currently there will stay the same within the development. It may not be located there, but the percentages and amount of retail space remain the same?
If that were to ultimately happen, I'm assuming that those folks who are there now would either try to become part of the new development or would look at other space up and down Watson Road because there is space available. The city, of course, would go out of its way, I would think, to make sure they stay in Crestwood. They're not businesses that anybody wants to go away. And I'm the only reason for those folks to relocate, then there's a capability to do it as a part of this plan. And to be able to pay through the TIF dollars or through the private dollars, their relocation, the cost of their property, whatever, Or conversely, let's say that they want to stay, and the solution is that there has to be some sort of retaining wall or something. In other words, something that protects the back of the site. Well, it's got to be done. You cannot, nobody can acquire property or can do something that affects another piece of property and harms it in some way without accommodating.
John, I have a question, if I could just ask you. There's been some discussion about you mentioned the pool system or the revenues are shared throughout the county. One of the things I understood was that originally this pool was based in part on the city's population. larger the population as a percent against what they're producing in sales revenues, tax revenues, the greater the portion that they have to keep of their own. We're talking about putting a 250, am I correct, 250 apartment complex in here, population increase, what, 600? 300 people possibly? 6 to 300? How does that impact the city of Crestwood from a positive and or negative standpoint, or does that really have any impact? And I say that because I know at one time our population was close to, what, 15,000 people, now it's scraping at 12, and obviously this site's not going to produce that difference again, but there is something to be said for a city that's growing internally, and I just wanted you to comment on that, if you would, please, from your expectations and your experience.
For this project to succeed, and for the existing retail and business community up and down Watson Road, it would seem to me, by all good urban planning criteria, that people, i.e. residents, are important, and employees are important, which is why an office user in the midst of an area like this, certainly Sunset Plaza's benefited mightily from all of the office development that's down there, and those people will tell you that, you know, they're going to Fuddruckers for lunch or Panda Express or wherever, and shopping at those stores. So the idea that there's both residential and office component in this proposal is, to me, an advantage, because it's not just an advantage to the project, it's an advantage to the city. Now, will the population have some effect on the sales tax revenue? I have no idea. Or the sharing formula.
Just to follow up on that, if I might, no, it's escaped, I'm sorry. There's some other questions coming
No,
up.
go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm stumbling right now, so if you could.
I've got a couple things, if you want me to.
Yeah, it'll come back in a second, thank you, sorry.
So just to follow up, it was brought to my attention that in the Shrewsbury development, at one of the TIF, it was a 2011 TIF Commission meeting, that actually you said that the input from developers confirmed that housing would not provide sufficient new revenue to support the anticipated redevelopment costs, and that office combined with retail might work, but may be unlikely due to a heavy concentration of offices around Watson Road and I-270 highway. Now, how can retail office combination be unlikely to work in 2011 due to offices on Watson and 270, but will work for Crestwood in 2015 when those same office conditions still exist?
First of all, the office market's different today than it was in 2011.
How so?
There's a greater demand.
Why? I mean, I'm not trying to be flip.
I don't know, but apparently there are.
I mean, I guess why are you saying that versus what you said in 2011 and 2000? I mean, I would assume
because Shrewsbury is even further off the access path.
Okay.
So someone wanting to put a bunch of employees in an office building is not going to go to Shrewsbury.
Okay.
Now, could you support, if one of the options that was looked at there was a medical office building? And that's the kind of a unique development that often fits with retail property all over the place. But Watson and 270, the so-called sunset, if you look at the people who analyze the office markets in detail, the Watson and 270 sub-market, sometimes they group 270 and Gravois and 270 sort of together as the Southwest County sub-market. Historically has the highest occupancy, in other words, the least vacancy of every sub-market in town.
Okay.
But it's all about access. So the people who are in those buildings, the companies in those buildings are there because because of the access. As you move away from that, putting, for example, developing this in office development, as I said before, would be certainly one alternative use. But I have never been able to convince anyone in the past to build an office, to look at any part of Crestwood for an office campus.
Okay.
And I've talked to, since 1982, I don't know how many conversations I've had with all of the major office developers. Now, there are unique situations, like the one in St. Anne, where you have a property that's within a stone's throw of I-70, and you're at Lindbergh and St. Charles Rock Road, and so the notion that you could have a call center there makes a lot of sense. But it's the only use in that, it's the only office user, at least so far, that showed interest in that site. I don't know if I'm answering your question. I mean, Shrewsbury is so different that it's, again, that location as a residential location made some sense. And it had the ability to be combined, to do a combined. We did one development alternative there that is a combination of residential and retail. The problem is that the cost of redeveloping that site was so great that you had to have something producing revenue to overcome those costs. It's the same, this is really the same scenario in that context. This without the retail components, this would work.
Okay. But it's kind of a follow-up on the cost to Crestwood with like the residential. What are we, if we're looking at, but I mean, it's not just residential, I guess, but I think having the residential buildings really can increase our public service costs. Has that been looked at? And I guess I raised that because I know Crestwood is operating in a deficit, I believe, this year. And so if we're going to add however many people, how many more police, fire, what's the usage of utilities? How much does that increase and how? And this may not be a question for you, this may be a question for Crestwood.
Just off the top of my head, I don't know why this would, you have to remember that this was 1 million square feet.
But I mean,
When it
a
was
million
open
square
and
feet
operating.
retail, is that different from 300 or 600, whatever, new residents? And I mean, I know it's an increase for the school district, but it might also be an increase, is it an increase for police or fire? Or
Residential typically demands less, and I don't know if the chief is here or not. Residential typically demands less in police than commercial, particularly retail development. And from a fire standpoint, to me, when you're dealing with brand new buildings, with brand new utilities, that where you know there's a fire hydrant right there, as opposed to even the mall as it existed was cobbled together because when it was redeveloped from open to closed. I just don't see how it would be any different.
is this something that anybody looks at doing that?
What was the question?
The question would become whether or not the police or fire costs
Basically,
or the
public services.
public service costs are somehow going to be greater with this than they would have been with some other development component.
The utility taxes go up with the usage of electricity in those buildings, and if you have a retail, there are times when those buildings are closed, so I suspect the utility cost right there would be a less producing tax revenue base than residents. That's just an assumption.
Office buildings are typically higher.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you're looking at the new taxes that you have now, just before you open up retail, you have utility taxes right then and there. It would produce an increase in revenue for the city to offset. I suspect it would cost them public services, but please go ahead.
Yeah. We've seen other cities analyze this in the context of redevelopment projects, so I'm sure the city could take a look at that and come up with a number if they haven't already. So we'll ask the city to evaluate that, police, fire, et cetera.
Thank you. With this analysis, can you tell us what percentage of it was based on concrete numbers that the developer has in hand and can build right away versus what numbers you had to assume? If you divide it into two, you know.
Well, I mean, because I'm assuming it changes from day to day, Mr. Burks here, he can tell you how many of these. We used numbers that were based on just not only the type, but in some cases, the entities that we were told he was discussing with. I'm not going to divulge those names.
No. Just
because
percentage.
I don't want to spook anybody that may be a good end user. So I would probably half of this, or a little bit more, is based on what I would call known quantity.
Okay. And is that typical?
Maybe like 60%. I mean,
How does that compare to other TIF plans?
it's probably about what we knew about Sunset Hills. Maybe a little less than we knew about Fenton, for example. Partly because in Fenton's case, we didn't know. The idea was always to have the sort of light industrial stuff that occurred on the, and office stuff that occurred on the, what would it be? The east end of the Walmart side of Gravois Bluffs. And that was, we had to start out there with a fairly large guess. Again, the same thing was envisioned for the other side of that development, where ultimately you actually got a sales tax producer. I mean, sales tax in terms of parts and service in Jim Butler. And pennies was not envisioned there either in the original development. Nor was the theater, if I recall correctly. That was envisioned as a different type of development, which was largely what I would call business park.
Thank you.
If there's no further questions, please proceed.
Well, we're basically to the end of this table. 17 is the distribution of the commercial surcharge. As I pointed out, I think table 18 is the distribution of projected sales taxes. Again, the monster table of 19, which is on 2 pages, is the same fiscal impact table with no build. Table 20. Again, these are all comparable to the build tables, by the way, in the first part, is the fiscal impact on affected taxing districts. Table 21 is the comparison.
Your summary on page 7.
Well, on the 7th page of
Of your,
the memo.
yes, sir.
John, I think you're looking at the development.
Oh, the pro forma. Well, yeah, no, this agrees with the scenario that's now on the table. This proposal has some variation from what was originally discussed. These numbers reflect the changes in square footages and uses. So the current tables match this development pro forma.
Just want to make sure that you have that opportunity to modify anything based on some changes.
Yeah, no, these, and as I said, what was handed to you tonight just attempts to hopefully give you a little bit easier ability to read some of those things.
Are there any other questions from the commissioner? Any other comments, statements we wish to ask each other, questions? Can we dismiss John at this point?
Sorry for that being so long.
No, it's all right. Thank you, sir,
Thank
very
you.
much. Appreciate it. The next on the agenda is setting the date for the next meeting, which the one date we do have set is Wednesday, the 3rd of February, 7 p.m. at the community center. There's been discussion about having one between now and then, and the commission continues to want to discuss that. Please, I'm totally open for it. So anyone who wants to make a motion or talk about that concept, bring it to a motion so the commission can vote, please, let's do so.
Not a motion yet, but I was actually thinking after the public hearing, that way we could take all this information and what we hear at the public and
This would
digest
be
it.
at the White Cliff Center, that the community center, that would be open to the public, between ourselves, then we would make a proposal to yea or nay to the Board of Aldermen at that point. Is that what you're?
No, I'd still like some time after that, again, and I assume that the White Cliff Center, that's when the public will ask us questions, will give us.
Yeah, their comments and questions will be presented to us. And that was something that I'm not sure that we'll be able to answer some of those questions.
I agree with that.
And I, certainly listen to comments and take those into consideration. So you're saying that even though we have a further session after the 3rd, that evening,
Yeah, take all
you
this.
still think you need more time to?
Well, certainly, because I need time to go through all of this, so we present it.
Well, we got 2 weeks.
We haven't heard the public.
That's true.
I want to make sure we hear the public. And
So what do you think is apropos then afterwards?
We were just after that.
Okay. Well, then let's decide at the meeting on the 3rd. Would that be more acceptable, or do you want to set it aside now?
Let's set it aside so we know.
So for the 3rd, we will, or do you want to do it tonight? That's my
No,
question.
I'm saying tonight, let's say, okay, on the 3rd, we're going to hear the public.
That's
Maybe
correct.
we have a week to consider what they have to say, and then we have a meeting with the developer and
And PGAB again, so any other questions that come up between now and then?
The board's decision on that is fine with me. Do we want to make that a motion that we have a meeting the week afterwards, which I think would be the 10th of February, assuming that and would we hold it here, or do you want to hold it at the White Cliff Center?
I assume it'd be like this.
Okay. Let's make sure the schedule's checked. And add them on that it's available that evening. Can we have a motion to that effect?
I'll do that. I'll make that motion.
That we have a meeting after the 3rd, that would be the 7th of February, at this, the 10th of February at this location, 7 p.m. To, at that point, discuss and then decide to pass or not pass this.
We'll also have the developer and PGAB.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Any questions?
And I don't know, I mean, maybe we'll be ready to decide, but maybe.
We might get some information then, as well, as we're asking the
We'll make a vote on the board
Right.
and commission at that point to decide if that's enough information.
PGAB. Give me a possibility.
Yeah, we'll prepare an agenda that provides options, just as we typically have done, and commission's prerogative as to whether to take action on the resolution that night or not. So I think the motion is to have a TIF commission meeting at 7 p.m. on February 10th at this location.
And that's the motion. Is there a second to that? Okay. Voting yea, please, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? Motion's passed. This meeting will take place on the 10th of February. Again, the next meeting of this commission will be the 3rd of February at White Cliff Park in the Community Center, 7 p.m. That will be for public comment and questions. And everyone's welcome. Now I'll take a motion, there's no other business for adjournment.
So moved.